Okay, so I think I was able to get everything to work properly this time. Um, so we'll start. Om Jnana-timirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraye. Anchakalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhu Vacha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Okay, hello everybody. Welcome. So here we're continuing our discussion of the second chapter of the first canto of the Srimad Bhagavatam, entitled Divinity and Divine Service. The previous sections, very quickly, the chapter began with the Sutta Goswami offering his respects to his audience and offering respects to his guru. And he went on to answer the questions of the sages from the previous chapter, chapter 1, where they asked a series of 6 questions. So he answered the questions of the sages. Primarily, this was in the last section that we did, was the definition of pure bhakti, and an emphasis also on what it was not. So he gave the Srimad Bhagavatam's definition of pure bhakti, and then in some subsequent verses he clarified and distinguished what pure bhakti was in relation to karma, and in terms of varnashram dharma, in terms of gyan and vairagya. So those are the verses that we went through last class. And it ended with this very nice verse. We ended on verse 14, I think. Tasmad ekana manasa bhagavan sattvatam pati shrotavya kirtitavyascha dhyeya pujascha nityada. Therefore, the devotee should constantly hear about, glorify, remember, and worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is their protector. Pati, the word is used. So basically it ended here by saying, take shelter of Krishna, take protection of Krishna, find your protection in Krishna, and then hear, chant, and remember about him. And Mitra made a nice comment just about when Srila Prabhupada gave that verse to the devotees when they were installing the Jagannath deity in San Francisco. And he said, you're hearing and chanting and remembering, and now pujas, now you'll do puja. So it's interesting, this sequence is often given. It's usually in this order, that first one should hear the knowledge, and then one should repeat it. So one should first hear and then chant, because by hearing it and then repeating it, it solidifies it in your mind. Like for me right now, giving this class, for example, having heard and listened to Guru Maharaj and then having to repeat it is quite an effort, and it causes it, that you have to kind of be a little bit more clear than perhaps if you were just listening. So this repeating of it, this chanting, solidifies it in the mind, and then remembrance, can come kind of as the fruit of those two things, of hearing and chanting. And this remembrance is what's glorified here in the next verse that we're about to read, verse 15. And in many ways, remembrance of Krishna is really a goal, because it remembrance awakens love, and then naturally one will remember what one loves. There's a famous verse that says, sometimes we can get bogged down in all the rules and expectations and what seem like restrictions and whatnot of devotional life, but there's a verse, Smarta Vyasatram Vishnu, right? That all the rules and regulations that we come in contact with, the basic, there are only 2 of them, that one should always remember Krishna and one should never forget Krishna. So this remembrance of Krishna is very, very central. And here we'll start here with text 15, where we see this is pointed out. So yad anutyasina yukta karma granti nirbandhanam chidyanti kovidas tasya kona kuryat kataratim. translation from Srila Prabhupada. Actually, I should have Vishnu's translation here too, because sometimes they're a little bit different. So Prabhupada says, with sword in hand, intelligent men cut through the labyrinthine knots of reactionary work or karma by remembering the Lord. Therefore, who will not pay attention to his message? And Vishwanath says the same thing with just a little bit different language. He says, who will not develop attraction for topics of the Lord, remembrance of whom, like a sword, cuts through the knots of karma? So it's emphasizing this just the remembrance of Lord Krishna will cut through the knot and tangle of karma. So this is a very powerful statements, and it's nice because the topics of Krishna and the stories about Krishna and what one remembers about Krishna, either his name or his form or his pastimes, his associates, they're so sweet and charming and easily to they're easy to think of, they're easy to talk about and become absorbed in because we can relate to them. They have a human-like quality to them, and just that they're very beautiful and charming. The setting of Vrindavan, the description of the beauty of the gopis, the beauty of Krishna's form, the cows, all these things are very, very easy to become absorbed in. And what this verse is saying here is that they have the power to destroy karma. When we look into it a little bit more carefully in our Acharya's books, we see that this means even parabdha karma. And that's a very powerful statement, because parabdha karma is the karma that's manifest right now. It's the karma that has me in the body of a white man, or my parents being who they are, etc. And most other paths also deal with the eradication of karma, but they don't eradicate this parabdha karma. So it's very fascinating, and these knots of karma, what did they call it here? Karma granti nirbandhanam. So the karma granta nirbandhanam. So these knots of karma, they're so complicated. We know that karma is an adi. It's been going on so forever. So tying a knot over and over and over forever means you end up with a big tangled mass. Now that's what guna means. In other words, for guna, we understand it as the modes of material nature, but the modes of material nature are also referred to as ropes. Gunas are like ropes, and every movement that one does in the world of cause and effect, causes these ropes to tighten a little bit more. The rope around your neck is getting a little bit tighter with every movement in this world. That the tangled knot is becoming more and more knotted up. That's a difficult thing. You see, like the Jains, I mean, their whole spiritual practice is almost, I mean, I'm not that familiar with it, but one part that struck me was they're very concerned about this detangling and not causing any more karma, because they understand the I guess the impediment that it causes. And the guys around here actually are very good at making knots. I'm not very good at making knots. Here they can make knots where it's this knot that one can tie, and it can hold a big amount of material, and with just one little pull, the whole thing comes apart. But usually that's not the case. Usually, if you tie at least when I have to tie something on the car or move something, you tie the knot, and I usually end up having to just cut it. And that's usually what it's like, is once the knot is so tangled, it's so difficult to untie it. Use your nails and your teeth to do it. Usually you just go and cut it. It reminds me of this funny video that Sham Sundar and I watched on YouTube once, because we have these bags of grains for the cows, and they're stitched, right? And they're stitched in such a way that if you just cut it and pass the string through and you pull it, the whole thing comes undone. Right, very nice. Just like the way it's sewn is done that way. But for some reason, I always get it wrong, and whenever I cut it and pull it, it just tightens even more. And so we watched a YouTube video about a person, and I won't be able to really kind of transmit the humor of the video, but it was very serious. And they were like, "Okay, hello, welcome to my channel." Oh, Sham Sundar, there's a cow outside our cabin. Sham, just so you know, there's a cow outside our cabin. Gita is loose. Sorry, I've got a cow outside the cabin, and Sham's garden is here. Um, Sorry, what was I saying? So the bag, you know, she made this video to show how to undo the knot and have the whole thing come undone. And she went through it, and then, oh, it didn't work. She went, oh, sorry, I meant to do it like this. She went through it, oh, it didn't work. And finally she just got a knife and slashed through the bag. And it was really funny because that's usually what I do. So, you know, swords, like the sword that's referred to here, the sword of remembrance of Krishna, cutting through the knots quite easily. It's like opening the bag with scissors. Gumaraj is fond of telling the story that Sridhar Maharaj tells about Alexander the Great, I think, where there was the Gordian knot. I'm not exactly sure what that was, but there's some kind of knot, and it was a contest to see which king could untie this knot. Sham, the cow is about to go in your garden. I'm sorry, 1 second. Go! Go! Oh, sorry about that. Sham, are you coming to the garden? 1 second. Go! Go! Hi guys, sorry about that. That's ashram for you. I'm a little bit out of breath. Okay, so where was I? Yeah, Gumaraj is fond of telling that story of Alexander the Great, how he was able to untie this Gordian knot, conquer India just by cutting it. So just like is told in this verse, remembrance of the Lord. So the idea is that swords cut through things very easily. Bhakti, remembrance of Krishna, cuts through things very easily. And you compare that with the other paths and the amount of difficulty that's required, such as, say, the Jains, they do so much to prevent violence. It's quite troublesome. Also, the yogis and the jnanis, it's quite a troublesome path to produce the same effect. And this extrication from karma and release from its grip is the goal of these paths as well. It's, in a sense, it's the low end of bhakti. This is kind of like concomitant with bhakti, or kind of well, the low end of bhakti. But on the other paths, this is the high end of the other paths. So even the low end of bhakti destroys prarabdha karma, and the karma that's manifest in this life, like I had mentioned. And normally other paths are able to destroy only the aparabdha karma, or the karma that's lying dormant, that would come out sometime in the future. So in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, the root of the suffering that we're talking about, the bondage of karma, the root of it is ignorance, of course. And this causes one, the basis of this ignorance is to consider oneself to be the center, and hence the enjoyer. Krishna says, Bhoktaram yogitapasam sarvaloka maheshwaram. And this is kind of what we think about ourselves, that we are the enjoyer, we are the center. So when we hear Krishna saying it, we might be a little, okay. Hopefully now the disturbances are gone. You know, but really this is Krishna's position, that he is the enjoyer. So when we act on this desire, this desire to be the enjoyer, the desire, you know, it causes us to act for the fulfillment, and this action causes reactions, both manifest and unmanifest, prarabdha and aparabdha. So the manifest is our prarabdha karma, and the concomitant suffering of that, and the unmanifest karma creates kind of a disposition to desire in the same way as before, and to act in the same way. So one has ignorance, which causes one to act, and then that action has two results, manifest and unmanifest. And so we live through the manifest karma, but the unmanifest karma goes on underground, producing the proclivity kind of to desire and act in the same way. So there's this cycle going on, or kind of like a big knot that causes the entanglement to continue. And the amazing thing is that the sort of remembrance of Krishna, his pastimes, his form, his name, cuts through both types of karma, unlike the other paths. So Haridas Thakur is an example of someone whose prarabdha karma was changed by bhakti. We're familiar with that story. And the idea, you know, kind of like a disease is treated, if a disease is treated early, it's usually easier to treat than when it becomes chronic. It's far more difficult. And similarly, karma, which is more difficult to eradicate, is this karma that's come to the surface. But even in sadhana bhakti, this suffering is released. It's one of the descriptions of sadhana bhakti, kleshagni. So it's one of the first characteristics given of the qualities of bhakti and sadhana. So this verse is very, very nice. It's meant to invoke faith, I would say, in the process and the stages that we're about to come to. And it's interesting. I mean, it's not exactly the same, but it's similar to the first verse of the Shikshastakam, which is also there meant to invoke faith in the path of bhakti in the stages that are about to come. And what's interesting about this section of the Bhagavatam is that these next couple verses are what give those stages, the stages that we're also we're very familiar with. Ado Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, Bhajana Kriya, Nishta, like this. These stages that we're familiar with, the seed of those, we find them in the Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. We find them brought out in the Shikshastakam of Mahaprabhu. The seed of those verses is here. That description is coming. And this first verse here is meant to invoke faith in the process by saying, you know, how amazing is it that karma is cut through just by remembrance of Krishna. In the same way, kind of that the first verse of the Shikshastakam is meant to invoke faith. So we'll move on to verse 16, and here we go. I'm hearing rustling outside like a cow. Hopefully she's gone. Shrushusho Sharahanasya Vasudeva Kataruchi Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra Punya Tirtha Nishevanat. So, O twice-born sages, by serving those devotees who are completely freed from all vice, great service is done. By such service, one gains affinity for hearing the messages of Vasudeva. So here, I'll just read Vishwanath's. He translates it a little bit differently. He says, O Brahmanas, attraction for topics concerning Krishna will arise by service to the great devotees, followed by faith, surrender to the feet of the pure Guru, and by the desire to hear. So here we see the initial stage of Shraddha. And actually, there are some kind of pre-stages that are alluded to here. Normally, we think that the path, we hear in the verse from Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu that bhakti begins with Shraddha, but there's actually something going on under the surface a little bit before, kind of like the roots of a seed going down, which are mentioned here, where he says, you know, will arise by service to the great devotees, followed by faith. And that service can be done, initially, often it's done unknowingly, and then it can evolve into knowing service until faith arises. And it's interesting to look at this verse, if we compare it back to a verse about Varnashram Dharma, where Dharma svanustita pumsam vishvakshena katasuyaha no padayet yatira timshrami eva hi kevalam. There he's saying that Varnashram Dharma is a waste of time unless it invokes taste and faith in in the message of the Supreme Lord. But you know what it's basically saying is that it doesn't do that. Only bhakti does that. So you want to know how that's done, and that's done. The answer is actually given here by service to great devotees. One gains taste for that. One doesn't gain taste for that from varnashram. One doesn't gain taste from that from Gyan, but one does gain taste from that by serving devotees. And serving devotees, of course, is a limb of bhakti. So, like I was saying, even a little bit further back, it's the mercy of the devotees that starts the whole process. But beginning with this verse, we're starting to see the progression of bhakti from faith to full-fledged prema. So let's just see here. So all the steps are basically condensations of this faith and refinements of this faith. The example is often given of sugar or sugar cane, or for me, it makes a little bit more sense like maple syrup, just because I grew up with that. It's very, very, initially what comes out of the tree, the sap of the maple tree is very thin and, you know, barely sweet, but by this refinement process, it becomes more and more sweet, more and more thick, until, you know, then you eat it on snow, and then even after further than that, it becomes like a hard crystal, like a candy. But it's, you know, it's also not that these stages are like super hard and fixed. They bleed into one another. It's a spectrum, both in quality and in depth. Like we have the terms Komal Shraddha, weak faith, and Shastriya Shraddha, strong faith, faith in scripture. And it's this idea of faith and this condensation of faith, of which all these steps of bhakti are, is a little bit different than the idea of belief. Like I think often in perhaps other religious traditions, it's like, do you believe or you don't believe? Do you have faith or you don't have faith? But it's a little bit different in Hinduism. I think it's a little bit more fluid. We even see it in these terms in terms of weak faith and strong faith. So it's not just necessarily belief, but there's a nice religious author that I like quite a bit. Her name's Karen Armstrong, and she speaks about it in a very similar way as Guru Maharaj speaks about faith, where it means more of a commitment or an involvement or an aspiration, kind of to follow the path that's laid out, and to experience it for oneself. So the beginning stages, that's what's being delineated here in this verse. But like I said before, the verse says attraction will come by serving the great devotees. And I mentioned that perhaps it can be even unknowingly that this service goes on, and then the faith will arise. Vishwanath Chakravarti, in his commentary, just a couple of verses later, gives a list of 14 steps instead of 9 at the beginning. And he talks about his first 2 steps, I guess I had mentioned them, but were the mercy of the devotees, which is the causeless cause of bhakti that we spoke about quite at length, and then service to the devotees, and then faith. So this sometimes is referred to as a gyata sukriti. Without knowledge, one does something. The seeds planted by the mercy of the devotees. And first, what's going on is these roots are going down before this sprout of faith first shows itself. I had a friend who, a devotee who used to travel with Guru Maharaj quite a bit, and he told this story in the airport, because he was traveling with Guru Maharaj in the airport, that Guru Maharaj was kind of like accepting all this junk mail, and it took him a little while to realize, like, you know, people handing out flyers and things like that Guru Maharaj would always accept it, and he was kind of wondering, you know, why is we're just having to throw it out afterwards. And then he kind of realized that, oh, Guru Maharaj, this person was giving him something. This person was acting as a giver, even though it was just giving a coupon or something like that. So Guru Maharaj was reciprocating in a way that this person is giving something, and unbeknownst to them, giving it to a superlative devotee. And Guru Maharaj was accepting it. So the devotee, who was a friend of mine, kind of saw this as you know, that beginning where unknowingly a person was giving something to a devotee. There's a very funny story, I think, about, I'm not sure if it was in New York or San Francisco or somewhere with, probably New York, with Prabhupada at one of their very first temples. The class was going on or something, and a drunk man came in and barged his way to the front and smacked down a roll of toilet paper right in front of Prabhupada, and then turned around and left. And the devotees were shocked, and they didn't know what to do. And Prabhupada said, just look, this man's spiritual life has begun. He gave something. So this is kind of where it begins. And in the next couple, well, I guess it's maybe 2 chapters ahead, the story of Narada is given, where Narada is describing his previous life in a previous kalpa, and he was the son of a maidservant, and they had the good fortune of having some saintly guests for the 4 months of the rainy season, and he because of this situation that arrived, he had the opportunity to serve them, to wash their dishes and perhaps eat their remnants. And the story goes on showing exactly these steps. So it's worth going and no, actually maybe it's worth just reading it, because it's very compelling when you see someone's personal story. I think Bhaktivinoda Thakur wrote a letter where he describes himself going through all the stages of bhakti. But here in the Bhagavatam, just in a couple chapters ahead, this progress, these stages of bhakti is given kind of in the story of Narada. And it's very, like I said, it's very compelling to hear it in someone's personal life. I'll just read a short piece of it. It says, "O Muni, in the last millennium, I was born as the son of a certain maidservant, engaged in the service of Brahmanas who were following the principles of Vedanta. When they were living together during the 4 months of the rainy season, I was engaged in their personal service. Although they were impartial by nature, those followers of the Vedanta blessed me with their cosmos mercy. As far as I was concerned, I was self-controlled and had no attachment for sports, even though I was a young boy. Once only, by their permission, I took remnants of their food, and by doing so, my sins were at once eradicated. Thus, being engaged, I became purified in heart, and at that time, the very nature of the transcendentalist became attractive to me. O Vyasadeva, in that association, by the mercy of those great Vedantists, I could hear them describe the attractive activities of Lord Krishna, and thus listening attentively, my taste and hearing for the personality of Godhead increased at every step." So it goes on, but it's nice to see that these stages that we're talking about in these verses are elucidated in the story of Narada in the next chapter. So what else did I want to say? Oh, I just wanted to mention that because of the way that Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur translates the verse, he gives things, the stages: service to the great devotees, followed by faith, followed by surrender to the feet of the pure guru. And that comes from the line Punya Tirtha Nishevana, and it refers to the sadhu or the guru. So in the context of sadhu sangha, after faith has arisen due to the mercy of the devotees, one takes to sadhu sangha, and within the context of that, one finds a sadhu that inspires one particularly, and takes shelter of them. So these stages are being given here, Shraddha, Sadhu Sangha, and the Bhagavatam refers to this saintly devotee, this guru here, as Punya Tirtha. And it's interesting because Tirtha is, of course, a word that means a crossing point, like a kind of like a portal to another dimension. It means often it means a specific place, a geographical place, like a holy place. But we hear often that the reason places really are holy is because of the people who live there. I think that there's a story of Ganga Devi where she was maybe a little bit reticent about going down to earth because she was afraid she would be contaminated by all the sins of everybody bathing in her. But she was reassured by saying, "Oh, don't worry, there'll be sadhus living on your banks, and therefore the sins of the people will not contaminate your waters because you'll have sadhus bathing in your waters." But basically, the idea is that the real point of going to these holy places these tirthas, which can either mean a holy person or a holy place, or a place where one crosses over, tarati, is because in a holy place, one's likely to run into holy people, and then one would hear their discussions and hopefully end up rendering some service to them. And having heard from holy people in a holy place, this whole process takes place. Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra says that the door to Syan Mahat Sevaya Vipra, Rishabhadev says something similar. He says Mahat Seva Dvaram, that the door to liberation is opened by service to great devotees. And there's verse after verse to substantiate this point. Devahuti says a very similar thing about how service to devotees opens up the gate to liberation. And why? Why is this so? It's simple. It's because the guru, is the one who gives the sadhana. He's the one who, or he or she is the one who gives the practice. So one develops faith and finds a teacher, and then the teacher guides one and gives one personal instruction as to how to perform sadhana. So this is the guru's mercy, and it's very, very practical. Sometimes we think of mercy from the guru as some kind of intangible ray of light or something like that, but it's actually a very practical thing. It's the sadhana that he gives, and in a sense, it's like faith. Faith is also not such an intangible thing. We see Bhaktivinoda makes a point, and Guru Maharaj likes to bring it out, that faith and Sharanagati correspond, and Sharanagati is also very much a practical thing. So one can kind of determine the level of one's faith by the level of one's Sharanagati, and the mercy of the Guru in the same way is not so intangible. It is quite a tangible thing. So we'll move on to verse 17. So verse 16 was mostly about serving the devotees, developing faith, and taking shelter of sadhu sangha. Now verse 17, Shrindvata Svakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtanaha, Hridyanto Sto Hyabhadrani Vinhunoti Suhurtsatam. Prabhupada translated it, Sri Krishna, the personality of Godhead, who is the Paramatma in everyone's heart and the benefactor of the truthful devotee, cleanses desire for material enjoyment from the heart of the devotee who relishes his messages, which are in themselves virtuous when properly heard and chanted. So, having faith and meeting one's guru, one begins one's sadhana, which is, like stated in this verse, Shrindvata Svakata Krishna, Punya Shravana Kirtana. So one basic sadhana is hearing and chanting about Krishna. And the idea, which is given further here, is that Krishna is present wherever his devotees are glorifying him. Prabhupada says here in the purport that the messages of the personality of Godhead, Sri Krishna, are non-different from him. Wherever, therefore, offenseless hearing of God is undertaken, it is to be understood that Lord Krishna is present there in the form of transcendental sound, which is as powerful as the Lord personally. Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu in his Shikshastakam declares clearly that the holy name of the Lord has all the potencies of the Lord, and that he has endowed his innumerable names with the same potency. So the idea that the chanting the name of the Lord or the pastimes of the Lord is the same as the Lord is given. There's a famous verse, Namas Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha Punyashura Nityamuktam Binatvam Nama Namino. This is a verse that's quoted quite a bit. And Binatvam Nama Namino means that the name and the named are the same. And the Vaishnavas are a funny bunch. It's said that the Vaishnavas see with their ears. Then it's this idea of transcendental sound. So as the name enters the ears, it bounces around in the head maybe for a bit, bounces around in the brain, but ultimately what happens is it goes down into the heart and begins the process of purification. And that's what we're hearing about in this verse is Bhajana Kriya. So Kapila Dev gives a nice verse where he talks about this Rasayana Kata, going from the ear into the heart. So that section of the Bhagavatam with Devahuti and Kapila Dev is very, very beautiful section. Vidhunoti suhurtsatam, the verse says. So this is referring to, let's see how Prabhupada translates that. The benefactor cleanses the heart of the truthful, basically. So it's that these sounds and these names take the shape of a friend. Actually, suhrt is the word that's used, which is a very nice word. It means kind of a well-wisher, a little bit older person who has well-wishing. Prabhupada was known for signing his letters like that, I think, like your ever well-wisher. So suhrt is kind of this, there are 4 different types of friends of Krishna. One of them is a little bit older, and they have this kind of friendly disposition. So the idea is that these sounds, the holy name, this hearing and chanting, it takes the shape of a friend or of a sweeper, and it goes and begins this process of cleaning the heart. And it's quite an amazing thing. Like I quoted that verse, Namas Chintamani Krishna Chaitanya Rasa Vigraha. So these things is Chintamani, he's Chaitanya, pure consciousness, Rasa Vigraha, the form of rasa. So this high thing would take such a lowly position and enter and do the dirty work, do the dirty work of cleaning the heart. So the result of the hearing and chanting about Krishna should be that the heart is becoming cleansed. Bhajana Kriya should give rise to the next stage, anartha nivritti, where one's anarthas are starting to be dissipated. So Bhakti Vinod gives 4 different types of anarthas. So these are the unwanted things in the heart that bind us to material nature. These are what form the knot of material nature. I'll just read them very quickly, but he divides it into 4 categories. The first being the defects of the heart. And these are all the things that become cleansed by chanting, the hearing and chanting and remembering. So defects of the heart are attachment, propensity to cheat and find fault, envy, and very bad one, pratishta, or the desire for recognition. And then there's also offenses, nam aparad, sev aparad, vaishnav aparad, and also jiva aparad, Bhakti Vinod says. So that's offenses against any living entity, even dogs and ants. There's the third, which is the thirst for material objects. So for pleasure in this world, or if you're a little bit religious, pleasure in the next world, for power, or for liberation. And then there's the illusions about spiritual wisdom. So misunderstandings about the nature of the jiva, misunderstandings about the nature of God. So these anarthas give rise and give birth to the 6 kind of great enemies that we read about in the scripture: kama, krodha, lobha, moha, mada, and matsarya. Lust, anger, greed, illusion, pride, envy. So these are the things that we're looking for the disappearance of by engaging in hearing and chanting and remembering. We should see that these things are starting to dissipate. And the worst, of course, there's a few that I guess maybe take the #1 spot for worst, but pratishta is singled out often as being particularly bad. I think it's referred to as pig stool even, and pigs eat stool. So it's emphasizing the point. Envy is also something that's not compatible with devotion or being a devotee. And fault finding, criticizing others. Jiva Goswami has made a powerful point where he mentioned that criticism is actually worse than envy, because envy's in the heart. The criticism is when it comes out and actually affects and it damages the other person. It has the ability to pierce the other person's heart. So in fact, criticism is worse than envy. So, practicing, it's a bit, we all have these kind of anarthas within us, and we're practicing, and as long, it seems a little bit slow. It's a little bit like cooking with smoke, so it could take a real long time to heat up the pot, but as long as we're trying, trying to get rid of them, then at least we're putting ourselves close to the fire, and it will happen. We want to see that these things are going away. So a bit of contrition is not a bad thing. We see that in Chaitanya Mahaprabhu when he says, Durdaivam idisham ihajani nanuragraha. He has a little bit of contrition, so it's not such a bad thing, but one continues hearing and chanting and comes to the stage of nishta, which is the next verse. And this is a famous verse. This verse sometimes is recited at the beginning of the of speaking on the Bhagavatam. So you probably know it. Nasta praeshu abhadreshu nityam bhagavata sevaya bhagavati utama shloke bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. So by regularly hearing the Bhagavatam and rendering service to the pure devotee, all that is troublesome to the heart is practically destroyed, and loving service unto the glorious Lord, who is praised with transcendental songs, is established as an irrevocable fact. So this verse is speaking of the stage of Nishta. So we've gone up through service to the devotees, the sprout of faith, and then sadhusanga, bhajana kriya, anartha nivriti in the next verse. And now here we come to nishta. So nishta is a well, it's an important stage. It's what Guru Maharaj says our interim goal should be. Prema is very far away. Prema is a very, very high thing, but nishta is something that we can really set as an interim goal. Guru Maharaj often compares it to climbing a mountain. And nishta is kind of when you get to the top of the mountain. You've done the work of kind of going up the slope, and now you're at the top of the mountain. And from there on in, it's downhill, and you can see where you're going. When you're going up the mountain, you kind of don't know what's on the other side. There's a Greek myth of Sisyphus. I don't know if you know it, where the guy who's condemned to push the boulder up the hill for eternity, he never gets to the top before the boulder rolls back down. But this is not the case in bhakti. And when you get to nishta, you actually got the boulder to the top. So there'll be some momentum going forward, and you'll see where you're going. So from a nishta bhajana kriya through anartha nivriti, in the last verse to nishta bhajana kriya. And we see that nasta preshu abhadreshu. So these unwanted things in the heart are almost completely destroyed. And in terms of faith, like I was talking about faith in a continuum before, this means going from, one's gone from komal shraddha, kind of a weaker faith, to shastriya shraddha, fixed faith, a faith that's fixed in scripture, nityam bhagavata sevaya. So this nityam bhagavata sevaya, it's fixed in the knowledge of the Bhagavat, and also in the service of the Bhagavat as a person. Two Bhagavats, this idea of two Bhagavats, we find it in all the translations, but this is the gift really of, in a sense, of Gaur Nitai. I think I quoted the verses in the last class, but in the beginning, when Gaur Nitai are being glorified, that they come like the sun and the moon, and they illuminate the darkness of the heart and help one to see, the truth. They do that by introducing one to these two Bhagavats. So one is the person Bhagavat and one is the book Bhagavat. I think it comes from Sridhar Maharaj, but I heard it from Guru Maharaj, but that, so at this stage, one is fixed in the service of the active agent, which would be the devotee, or fixed in the service of the passive agent, which is the book. So they both serve different functions, and it's nice. It's beautiful that this Bhagavat manifests itself both as the advanced devotee and as the book. Then we have a real good chance, because at this stage, before it's pretty easy for the intellect to be captured by many different things and many different ideas. But at this stage of nishta, the intellect has become so absorbed and engaged, captivated by the book and captivated by the service to the devotees, that it's really hard to go anywhere else. So if the person is fixed, the modes of nature, they may still be pulling on one, but through intellect and fixity, that one's able to kind of resist these things and not, in a sense, not be swayed, because one is intellectually convinced. And it says bhaktir bhavati naishtiki. So it's fixed. It's nityam bhagavata sevaya. in Prabhupada's words, he says, Kirtaniya Sadahari. So he says, Trinadapi Sunichinam Tarorega Sahishnamya Amanina Manadena Kirtaniya Sadahari. So that Kirtaniya Sadahari is referring to this Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, constantly being engaged in the service. It's worth mentioning the symptoms of this stage because they're very beautiful. They're what really ornament the devotees more so than than anything else. um, these four things that are brought out by Mahaprabhu. This verse that I just quoted corresponds with this verse. So he says Kirtaniya Sadahari Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya, but then he also gives these beautiful qualities. And these qualities are not the central part of Nishta. The central part of Nishta is Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya. But still they're quoted by Mahaprabhu. The Swarup of Nishta is this fixity, but he included these qualities and symptoms because they're very, very favorable, and they're practically intrinsic to bhakti: humility, tolerance, not expecting any admiration, and showing others veneration. So they're the ornaments of the sadhu. Again, this in the third canto, Lord Kapila, he's I should read the verse because it's really nice. If I can just find it quickly. He says, Titik Shava Karunika Sudhrida Savadehinam Ajata Shatrava Shanta Sadhava Sadhu Bhushanam. Sadhava Sadhu Bhushanam. So the symptoms of a sadhu are that he is tolerant, merciful, friendly to all living entities. He has no enemies. He is peaceful. He abides by the scriptures, and all his characters are sublime. So this is Sadhva Sadhu Bhushanam. These are the ornaments of the sadhu. They're practically the same, as you can see. Krishna's one of my favorite names of Krishna, or I don't know if it's a name or a descriptor more, but he's called Bhushana Bhushanangam. It's a very nice word to describe Krishna. It means that he is the ornament of his ornaments, meaning he beautifies his ornaments. So we put rings and jewels and crowns on Krishna, and they're beautiful on their own, but they become even more beautiful on the body of Krishna. And in a similar way, these qualities of humility, tolerance, and compassion and whatnot are, they're very, very beautiful qualities, and they have much value in their own right. But when they're joined with devotion, they become extremely beautiful. They take on an extremely beautiful quality. The humility and tolerance of the devotee is something very beautiful. There's lower and higher stages of these things. Someone could be, humility is a kind of someone who behaves humbly it's innately attractive, but a lot of people can be humble just because they're poor, or people can be humble just because of their circumstance, or they can be humble because of some remorse or something like that. But there's this higher level of humility that one's seen in devotees, where the humility is coming really from an understanding of the finiteness of the soul compared to the infiniteness of reality. They experience this junction between time and space, and it causes this kind of higher level of humility. And Gumaraj also explains how there's kind of a lower level of tolerance and a higher level of tolerance. And so I was just kind of thinking about it a little bit, and how these qualities are inherently beautiful, but when you see them in a devotee, the devotee makes them even more beautiful, just like Krishna makes his jewelry even more beautiful than it is on its own. So, I mean, there's much to be said about all these verses. I'm just trying to do an overview, but we'll move on to text 19. So we've come to the stage of Nishta, and then the next stage is Ruchi and Asakti. So this is the verse. Tadara Justamo Bhava Kama Loba Dayaschaye Cheta Etar Anavidam Stitam Sattve Prasidati. At the time loving service is established in the heart, the modes of passion and ignorance and lust and desire disappear from the heart, and the devotee is established in goodness and becomes happy. Let's see how Vishwanath translates it. He says, the mind becomes unaffected by lust, greed, anger, hatred, and illusion, which arise from rajas and tamas. Then the mind becomes fixed in the form of the Lord at the stage of asakti and becomes satisfied. So very similar. So Rajaguna, passion, Tamaguna, ignorance and lethargy, lust and greed, these are no longer affecting or agitating the mind. So what it's saying is that there's no taste for these in this realm anymore. There's no taste for the objects, implying that there is a taste for hearing and chanting and remembering, because one's no longer influenced by these lower things. One's being influenced by higher things. One's being influenced from the other side. There's a taste for the devotional practice. And so, like Mahaprabhu says, Nadanam Najanam Nasundaram. This is his verse that corresponds with Ruchi. Nadanam Najanam Nasundaram Kavitam Vaj Jagadisha Kamaya. So there is taste for devotional practices at the stage of Ruchi. So there's not taste for other things. There's not taste for wealth. Nadanam Najanam Nasundarim, not for people or beautiful companions. By extension, there's not for religiosity, the wealth of religion. Mama Janmani Janmani Ishvari, he says. So, birth after birth, he's not even interested in moksha. So these things, it's the higher taste that we talk about. Tamas kind of rules over common pleasure, rajas over artha and power, sattva over dharma, religion, virtue. So there's no desire for these things anymore. Only bhavatad bhakti or ahaitukitvayi. So only for bhakti. Pure bhakti is defined in this chapter. The word that you start to see that the same words are used in all these different places. Ahaituki, unmotivated. So bhakti for bhakti's sake. Bhakti for bhakti's sake is the principal characteristic of ruchi. Here, the difficulty or medicine of sadhana, because it can be difficult a little bit, has become food and it tastes really good. So the devotee is relishing at this stage. I think that the acharyas have said that this is a stage of pure bhakti, Shuddha bhakti, because there's no longer any influence from the red, white, and blue of the modes of material nature. The heart's not affected by these modes anymore. Mahaprabhu describes it as Shreya Kaira Chandrika Vitaranam. He describes it as a white lotus that's blooming under the influence of moonbeams. The idea that the other side is starting to come through and touch the heart, and the heart it's described as a white lotus, so it means it's uncolored by the passions of this world, the vanities of this world, and something more is coming from the spiritual side, the Shreya Kairava Chandrika, these moonbeams. So this is the higher taste, the taste for devotional practice. In the second part of the verse, the taste and attachment turns to, should I say, the object on which the practices were focused. So Sheta etala navidam stitam sakve prasidati. So in ruchi, the attachment and taste is towards the practices of devotional service. One's interested in hearing and chanting and remembering, and one gets encouragement and taste from this. And then the shift to asakti, attachment, is where one becomes focused and attached to the form of the Lord. How does he say it here? One becomes fixed in the form of the Lord at the stage of asakti and becomes satisfied. So one becomes attached to the person who you're chanting about, who you're hearing about, who you're remembering about. There's a person on the other side, and now the attachment and it has transferred to the person. So there's also a shift at this point from the material identity to the spiritual identity. When one receives the Diksha mantras, inside there is a seed, and it's the seed of a relationship. And asakti is really a stage about relationships, because because there's another person on the other side. And the very interesting thing about Gaudiya Vaishnavism and our idea of Krishna and God is that he's a very social God. It's a very, I mean, it's a very social, social spirituality. It's very much about relationships, and the goal is to enter this social life of God, family and friends and whatnot. Mahaprabhu, his verse corresponding to this section, he says, Ainanda Tunuja Kinkaram. So uh, there's two people being talked about here, Ainanda Tanuja. This is the way I read in someone's, I forget where I read it, but that Ai is the way that a lady would call out to a man. I think perhaps men would say, hey, Nanda Tanuja, and a woman would say, Ai Nanda Tanuja, Kinkaram. So here, there's two people in the verse. It's relational. There's the son of Nanda, and there's his maidservant. So this is, and it's also a stage of attachment, stitam. Once that's in this verse here, right? At the stitam sattve prasidati. So one is fixed in this relationship. One is taken. There's, sorry, I'm not interested in anybody else. I'm taken. I've got a ring on my finger or whatever. So moving on then to text 20. How are we doing for time? I think I can get through this. So text 20, Evam prasana manaso bhagavad bhaktir yogata bhagavat tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. Thus established in the mode of goodness, the man rejuvenated by loving service to the Lord gains liberation from material association and comes to know scientifically of the personality of Godhead. And Vishnu Chakravarti Thakur translated as, thus the mind becomes joyful and satisfied on attaining rati, bhava. Finally, prema develops, accompanied by the appearance of complete detachment. The devotee then experiences the Lord's form, qualities, pastimes, and sweetness. So evam prasanam manaso, this means bhava, spiritual emotions. Bhava is described as a ray of the sun of prema, a ray of the sun of love. So the mind, how is it given here? Evam prasanam manaso, thus enlivened the mind. Like the mind becomes joyful at dawn when the rays of, just when the sun is coming up, first the rays come. That's how Baba is described, as a ray of prema. So in the morning, the mind becomes joyful when seeing the rays of the sun coming up, because the darkness is over. The sun, there's nothing that can stop it now. The sun is gonna come over the horizon. The rays have peeked over. The sun is coming. This is a stage of Bhava where the spiritual emotions, there's an ingress of spiritual emotions. And it's kind of it's an interesting stage. It's a stage that's in between sadhana bhakti and prem bhakti. So it's kind of like a sadhana of a spiritual, it's an in-between stage, a stage in between sadhana and prem. There's elements of sadhana and there's elements of prem. It's described that bhava softens the heart. So these emotions, are being churned. This is kind of the sadhana of bhava. These emotions are being churned to form this kind of pinnacle or crescendo of rasa. So it's characterized by these emotional ecstasies, tears and perspiration. But there are also other more kind of down to earth manifestations that might be a better way to kind of test such, because tears and fainting and whatnot are easily faked, but not wasting time, that's not easily faked. Having a complete lack of pride, that's not easily faked either. I mean, you really have to be a saint not to procrastinate or waste time. And when you see that, there's other indications that describe bhav. So evam prasanam manaso bhagavad bhakti yogataha. That means Vishwanath Chakravarti has explained that means praying to Bhagavan. Bhagavad tattva vijnanam mukta sangasya jayate. So mukta sangya, so that means that these other things that we discussed kind of in the last class, like detachment and knowledge and stuff, they come automatically. And Bhagavad tattva vijnanam. Vijnana means realization. Gyan means knowledge. Vigyan means realized knowledge. So Bhagavad tattva vijnanam. That means knowledge of the Lord's form, qualities, pastimes. This is manifest in Bhav. So we'll just do the last, there's just two quick verses before kind of the end of this section of this chapter. So verse 21, Vidyate hridaya grantis chidyante sarvasamshaya, kishyanti chasya karmani drishta evatmanishware. Thus the knots of the heart and all misgivings are cut to pieces. The chain of fruitive actions, karma, is terminated when one sees the self as master. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, ignorance is cut and all doubts are destroyed. On seeing the Lord in the mind and with the eyes, all karmas are destroyed. So we started with this idea at the beginning of the sword of remembrance cutting through the knot of knowledge, the knot of karma. And here we've got kind of a repetition of it after going through all the stages from Shraddha to Prem. So this is a verse that's kind of shedding further light on what prema is and what it does as a byproduct. Vidyati hridaya grantis chidyanti sarva samshaya. So the knot in the heart is cut and all doubts are removed. And this is as a mere byproduct of prema. So this knot in the heart, like we mentioned, is ahankar. This is what binds us to matter. And there are other paths that deal with this, like yoga and gyan. They're whole paths unto themselves. They're dedicated entirely to trying to untie this knot. And it may be accomplished through them, that they are legitimate paths, but it's not certain. And it's also very difficult to do it oneself. Whereas if one calls for Krishna's help, and he comes with a sword, well, it's much easier. I remember hearing a story about, I can't remember the details of it, but there was a devotee, a sannyasi, someone praying in front of a murti of Narayana with 10 arms and all these weapons, the club, the discus, the sword, all these things. And there was a altar of Radha Krishna or something, and I can't remember exactly who it was, but his godbrother came over and noticed that he had been spending a lot of time in front of this really opulent Aishwarya deity of Narayan. And he was wondering why he wasn't, maybe praying to the sweet forms of Radha and Krishna. So he asked him, why are you spending so much time praying to Narayan? And the devotee replied something along the lines, well, I'm not praying to Narayan, I'm praying to his weapons. So he's praying to the sword of Narayan. I think in Ramanuja, perhaps there's even pujas, pujas to the chakra, puja to the sword of Narayan. So this is the common sense of bhakti, that instead of trying to untie the knot oneself, one depends on Krishna and his sword to come down and slice the knot in half. Again, Srila Sridhar Maharaj's story of Alexander the Great, all those different kings couldn't untie the knot through self-effort, kind of being analogous to the passive jnana and yoga. But bhakti was bhakti is like the common sense Alexander who just cut it through with the sword. Having Krishna come and slash the knot is a much easier process, because it's not to just untie it. If you, there's no chance for it to be tied up again. If you come and you cut the knot, you're not going to be able to go and retie it again. And again, and then Kishyanti Chasakarma. So also all doubts that one will be successful on the path are destroyed as well. Doubts are, a big thing. One might have doubts about the philosophy or one's progress, but should never be doubtful that one will be successful. That's the very nature of bhakti. So all doubts are slashed. And what it is directly, drishta evatmanishware, one sees the Lord directly. There's different types, internal darshan, external darshan, but the word atma can be translated in so many ways that Vishwanath comments that it means one seeing the Lord in one's mind, like Brahma did at the dawn of creation, or even a higher stage, which is given in Srimad Bhagavatam. Rita talks about seeing the spurti of the Lord outside, is considered to be an even higher stage. And then just the last final verse, text 22, Ato vai kavayo nityam bhaktim paramaya muda vasudeve bhagavati kurvanti atma prasidam. So therefore, all transcendentalists have been rendering loving service with great delight to Lord Krishna, the personality of Godhead, from time immemorial, because such devotional service is enlivening to the self. So it ends on, this section ends on a very kind of high and positive point. Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, thus the wise constantly perform bhakti to Lord Krishna with great joy, which gives joy to the mind. So with great joy, in sadhana bhakti, it said there's no suffering in devotion. This is kind of funny, but there's no suffering at any stage in sadhana, bhava, prema. It sure looks like there's suffering. Mahaprabhu certainly looks like he's suffering, but that's of a totally different nature. Gumarj likes to quote the verse, Vaya Vishajala Hoy, Vitare Anandamoy, Krishna Prema Adbhuta Charit, that on the outside it looks like poison, but on the inside it's pure bliss. So reading this verse, it was kind of a nice point to end, because it's kind of just like chant and be happy. Bhakti should be a joyful process. When people first meet the devotees, that's the first impression that comes. You see the devotees are singing and dancing and feasting, and it's a beautiful colors and smells and sparkling jewelry and lights. So it's a very joyful process, and there's so much philosophy here, so many stages delineated, so much to know that we're just touching on, but going through all these stages to get to the point where one can just chant and be happy. So you can't fake it. You need to be able to back it up with some sturdy foundation, but still, bhakti is a very joyful process, and I hope that all the devotees are happy. So that's the end of this section. There's another section that ends the chapter and kind of transitions into the third chapter of the first canto, which is all about the avatars, and where we find another very famous verse, Krishna's Bhagavan Sayam. So the next part of this chapter is kind of a bridge to the third chapter. But we'll end there, and I'll unmute you guys, I think, here. I just apologize for the cow. That was a little bit disruptive, but there are worse things. And I heard from Padmana Maharaj that he was hoping that if anybody has any questions, that we would be able to save them, and that you would go onto the Tattva Vivek on Facebook and ask your questions there, and then it could kind of like develop into a further discussion for the larger community. But if someone's not on Facebook and they would like to ask a question now, I'd be happy to try and entertain it. Or I'd also just like to hear any comments or anything anybody would like to share, or any corrections. I think I've made it able so that you can just unmute yourself. Does anybody have anything they would like to say? Okay, well, we'll end it there.
I want to say that I would like to say that your classes are getting better each time.
Oh, thank you. That's very kind of you. I was a little frazzled and hot, actually, from chasing the cow.
You did a good job.
Thank you very much. That's very, very kind of you to say. Haribol.
I'm Gaurasundara's mom.
Oh, I know.
Okay. Pranam.
Happy birthday to Gaurasundara.
Okay, yeah, I'll tell him.
Is there anybody else who would like to say something? Okay, well, we've gone over about 10 minutes, so thanks, guys, and have a great week. We'll see you next week. And if you have any questions that you'd like to post on Tattva Vivek on Facebook, please do. Haribol.